And I'll turn it over to you, Tony.
All right, thanks, Bill. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to tonight's class. I'm excited you all could show up tonight. I'm just going to go right into the talk here. So we'll get the screen shared and get started. Okay. All right, so we'll launch right into the presentation here. Okay, so as Bill mentioned, my name is Tony Johnson. I am a natural resource educator for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome to tonight to Learn About Your Land class online. This is an adaptation of our Learn About Your Land class series that we generally run in person. So we're taking, trying something a little bit different tonight. It might be a little bit extra of my voice than you want to hear, but I think we got some really great content, so I think it's worth sticking around. We're going to be talking about getting to know your local trees and invasive plants. So jump right into it. Some of the big objectives for tonight are how to use the tree key. So as I'm getting started here, there should have been a couple attachments sent with your invitation, and they're going to be really important for the presentation tonight. I know my window is a little small, but I'm going to just hold this up quick. It's the tree identification key. There should be a coniferous tree and a deciduous tree key on there, as well as a couple of terms with, or a couple of sheets with definitions that are going to be really important for following along. So in addition to going through the key, we're going to try to identify some important tree species that are found in the state of Wisconsin. Again, this is generally focused on specific counties, but we're gonna take more of a statewide approach today, and you're gonna get a little bit of my bias and my personal favorite trees. We're also going to be looking at some of the non-native invasive species that you could find in your woods. All right, so tree ID keys, what are they? They're, like it says, basically a roadmap for identifying your trees. You're gonna be presented with a series of questions, and if you answer all of your questions, you're gonna end up with the identity of the species that you're looking at. So some of the key features for trees are gonna be the leaves, bark, and twigs. And then I just wanted to make a note. Again, we're gonna be looking primarily at the leaf key tonight. But for your own personal interests, there's a lot of good tree identification books that are available for our area. I don't have specific recommendations for any of them individually, but I think that, you know, just focusing on getting a book that covers your local area. I also like to get a book that's got some good color pictures. And then a nice part about the identification books is, in addition to the key that's going to help you identify your tree, they often include some information about that tree, some ecological information, maybe some history about it, or other uses. Okay, so dichotomous keys, it's a big word, but it's basically, like we said, a roadmap for identification. You're asked to make a choice, and based on that decision, it's like a choose your own adventure. You go down the path and you end up with the ID of the tree that you're looking for. So as you can see in the cutout here, this is a snip of the actual tree key. So there's, as you can see, there's going to be a question. It's going to be two number one questions, and you're going to look at those two, and then based on whether you think it falls in the first number one or the second number one, you're going to go to the next question based on the number at the end of the line. So if I'm looking at needles and bundles or groups, I'm going to go to question 2, and then below you can see there's 2 number questions 2, and I've got to pick which one to go to the next spot in the line. So the dichotomous keys basically just means you've got 2 choices at each point, and they're not just used for tree identification. You can use them for all kinds of species, plants, rocks, all kinds of stuff. So one important part of using a dichotomous key is it's going to be filled with terminology that's very specific to what you're looking at. So they try to make dichotomous keys short and something that you could carry with you out into the field. So they're going to have some terminology rather than spell out everything. So some of the important definitions right away, as you can see in the bottom, I've got the snippet of the actual key here, and you can follow along with me as I'm talking through some of these definitions. But number one is, is it a conifer tree or a deciduous tree? So a conifer tree is often called an evergreen, but basically they've got needles and they're cone bearing, so they don't have the true flower like a deciduous or a hardwood tree. And a hardwood tree, as you can see, it's got broad leaves. They lose their leaves every year, and they've got a true flower. So they're very distantly related, and that's why we can make this separation right away at the beginning of our investigation into the species. So some more definitions. Needles, if we're looking at the conifer tree, they can be single needles. If you're looking at the top, the left picture there, you can see the individual needles connected to the stem. You've got one needle there, so that's a single. And then the picture on the right, you can see the two needles that are connected at the base, and the area in the yellow circle is actually where the needles or the leaves connects to the stem. So in that case, that's a group of two needles. So I just have another snippet here. If you're following along on your key, on the first question in the conifer key is, are the needles in bundles, or are they single or flattened and scaly? So that's kind of the big separation point with conifer trees, is looking at whether you've got a single or cluster of needles. Okay, so then if we get back to the deciduous trees, and it's going to be on the second page of your leaf tree identification key. An important bifurcation point is whether the leaves are simple or compound. So the leaf on the left is a simple leaf. As you can see, it's just one main leaf with the stem. We'll get into more of the individual terminology on the leaf in a little bit, but it's very different from the leaf on the right, where you're seeing multiple leaflets that are all connected to one main stem that goes back to the tree. So if we're looking at the identification key, this is actually on questions both 2 and 4, and it depends on how you answer question number 1, but it's basically the same question, and you got to see whether you've got a compound leaf there, and that leads you in one direction, or whether it is a simple leaf, and that leads you in another direction, depending on where you are in the key. Okay, so here we've got just some more terminology on leaves. So the picture here has, they're both sets of compound leaves. So what you're seeing there on the top with the 7 individual parts connected to one line going back to the stem, that's one individual leaf. So the big distinction here is whether they're connected to the main stem in an opposite or alternate fashion. So on the top, the 2 leaves are directly on opposite sides of the stem, and that's going to be consistent for a given species. And then on the bottom, you can see the leaves that are connected to the main stem in an alternate fashion. So it goes kind of every other. You've got the node and internode separated the leaves. Okay, and then we can get even further into the weeds here with some types of leaves. There's shapes that describe the leaves. Here's a key. We've got some of this spelled out on our term sheet, but this is information that we've got on our website that I'll refer to later. But in addition to the shape, there's also a description of the leaf. So on the bottom, you can see the tooth serrated and smooth, and it can be sometimes hard to tell between the tooth or serrated or other descriptions. So one important factor of using the dichotomous keys is that there's going to be some judgment involved, and you might make the wrong guess as you're going through, and you might have to go back. So like looking at the top and all the different leaf shapes, it might not be obvious whether you've got a lanceolate or an oval shaped leaf. So you might have to follow the key a little bit to see whether you're on the right track or not. But it's something that's going to require judgment, and as you get more experience with it, you'll get more comfortable on how these terms are applied to leaves that you're going to find out in the woods. So some more terminology about the leaf is referring to the shape and attachment. So a really important characteristic in identifying whether a leaf is going to be simple or compound is this term on the bottom, petiole. So the petiole is the place where the leaf connects to the main stem. So it's just really important to identify what is the actual petiole of a leaflet when you're determining whether you've got a compound or a simple leaf. And then some other terms here, we've got the lobe. And as you can see on the lobes, there's the lines, those are the leaf veins. And the lobe is basically where the leaf sticks out. And in the area between lobes, we refer to that as the sinus. So again, these are just going to be terms that we're going to be coming up with on our dichotomous key, so I wanted to make sure that everybody is familiar with them. It's not expected that anybody memorizes these terms because you can always look back at the definitions as you're going. A lot of times when people are going through keys, especially as you're getting started, it's great to have the dictionary or the definitions right by side. So to move away from the leaves for a minute, there are some other clues in the twigs that can help you identify what you're looking at. Our key today does not have a whole lot of features that look at the twigs, but I just wanted you all to be aware that a couple important terms about twigs are the pith, so kind of the center area of the twig. If you cut it open, you'll be able to see these different patterns or different structures, whether it's open or continuous or chambered. Those are just other features that you can use to identify the species because they're going to be the same in a given species. And then also on the bottom here, it's not important that you read everything on this slide, but just know that there are these other features on twigs. So one is the leaf scar, which is the mark of last year's leaf. So as a leaf falls off, it's going to separate from the petiole and the stem, and it's going to leave this scar mark, and the shape of that is going to help you identify the species. And then above that leaf scar is auxiliary bud. So that is the bud of next year's leaf. So that bud is going to be really important in helping you identify whether you're looking at a compound leaf or a simple leaf, because a compound leaf with many leaflets is not going to have a bud on those leaflets. Only a simple leaf is going to have a bud at the bottom of the petiole. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Okay, so we just went through a bunch of terminology, and I wanted to just take a break here for a second and review some of the terms, but I wanted to let everybody know that we do have a YouTube channel, and Bill had mentioned that this video will be available on the channel after tonight's broadcast if you'd like to come back and check it out. But we also have other features on that channel. So one of the series that we run is called the Forestry Minute, and it's just about a minute long, but I'll play this one for you so you got kind of a feel for what that is, and it reviews some of the terms that we just talked about. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna make sure I've got the audio on here. All right.
Welcome to the Forestry Minute. Here are some characteristics of leaves that will help you determine what tree you're looking at. The leaves on the branch can be arranged opposite each other, or they can alternate from one side of the branch to the other. Some leaves have a smooth edge, while others have a serrated edge or a toothed edge. Leaves can have many different shapes, from round to oval to triangular to narrow or quite irregular. Some leaves have lobes sticking out from the center, and the gap between the lobes is called a sinus. Leaves have a network of veins running through them that can be straight or with many branches. And finally, leaves can be simple or made up of a number of leaflets. Check out the link below to learn more about tree identification.
All right, so that's just a feel for that series. We cover a bunch of different topics. Another one that would be of interest to folks who are looking to get their ID skills up to speed is we've got a bark identification video up there as well. Okay, so it is time to use your key. Like I mentioned before, the meat of this talk is going to be how to use this key so that you can go out and identify trees on your property. There's no way we could go through everything, and if you're like me, you'd probably forget it the first couple times you learned it anyway, so it's good to have a way to get you back to that identification point. So maybe we could just share the link that I had in the last slide at the end of the Forestry Minute video, and then also the link to the PDF version of this key in the chat feature, so that anybody who does not have that have this ready can pull it up. Again, I'm going to be referring to it quite a bit, so we'll just make sure we've got that available to you.
Yep, the link is in the chat, so please check there if you do not have the key. So you can click on the link in the chat and you should be able to download the tree identification key.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna just start out trying to work through our key together. So if everybody could just pull up the tree identification key, and Lauren, if you could launch the first poll. We're also gonna be including polls for folks to just get their 2 cents in if they want to guess what species we've got available here, or what species we've got on display here. But basically, so I start at the top of my key, and this is a conifer tree. We've got that listed at the top of the slide here, and you can tell based on the needles. So we're gonna go to our conifer tree key, and then the first question there is about our needles and whether they're in bundles or groups or single, flattened, and scaly. And you can't really tell from the picture on the top left, but on the bottom you can clearly see we've got a cluster of needles there, or a group of needles that all goes to one point. So we're going to move on to question number 2. And that question is referring to the groups, whether it's in a cluster of more than 5 needles, or it's in a bundle that has either 2 or 5. So as we can see here, we've got 5 needles, and it is a white pine. Right, so you can kind of get the feel of how I go down the list here. I start with number 1, that took me to number 2, and then number 2 took me to the pine species box below. So then I would just read descriptions A, B, and C and determine which one it is based on that third question about the number of needles. So I always remember white pine because it's got 5 needles and white has 5 letters. So that's a pretty easy way to remember it. White pine, there's a couple facts here for you. It's one of my favorite trees. It's really neat in northern hardwoods, or in northern timber, where it stretches into the super canopy. So it is a tree that can grow taller than almost all of its neighbors, and so you'll often see them sticking out above, like the picture on the right here. It's a really important species for all different sorts of wildlife as well. All right, so let's launch poll number 2. And again, we've got a lot of information on this slide. Each slide is going to have a little bit less information, and we'll go and work through this together. So again, we've got needles here, so we're on the conifer tree key. And then our question is a single cluster or group. So this is what we call a cluster. And you can tell because there are just a whole bunch of them that go back to that one base. And based on that, we've got more than 5 in our cluster in question number 2, so it's a tamarack. Tamarack are a really interesting tree. They're one of the only deciduous evergreen trees, so they lose their needles every year. And what you're seeing here, what's labeled branch spur, that's the actual stem. So every year it gets a little bit longer as a new bud forms on the end of that spur branch. So in the winter, you'll be able to see a bunch of little nubs on the branches, but there won't be any leaves. And then, so it grows in wet bogs. It's very commonly used for poles and posts. It makes sense growing in bogs. It's it's not rot susceptible, so it lasts a long time. It is a slow growing tree, so it's not a big commercial species, but it's a really, really beautiful tree, great for wildlife. There's a great stretch of them in the central part of the state, up Highway 51 north of Madison. All right. So next one, this is poll number 3. So here, as you can see, we are no longer in the conifer trees because we're dealing with broadleaves. So we got to flip over our tree key and go to the deciduous tree key. And the first question on that key is whether it's opposite or alternate branching. So you got to look at the left picture there, and you can see the kind of red petioles connecting to the stem on opposite sides. So that's opposite, which takes us to question number 2. And that is asking whether it's a compound leaf or a simple leaf. So we can see the one leaf with the petiole connected. There are no leaflets, so this is simple. And in this case, that takes us to a maple species, and we go to the box below question number 2 on the deciduous tree key. And so there's a couple different options there, and they're really looking at the leaf margin. So the areas in between the leaf here, are these smooth toothed or double toothed. So we've got to kind of use our judgment here, and got to also compare to the other species that you are looking at. Now we're down to just the 3 maple species that it could be. So we can kind of consider those when we're making our decision here. So we've got smooth leaf margins here. I would call that smooth. And we've got 5 lobes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the main veins coming off of the petiole here. So it's a sugar maple or a hard maple. Sugar maple is another one that when you have a mature tree, you can see the bark on the upper right, it kind of peels off on one end and kind of like a scroll of paper, but only on one side. So that's another key with a more mature tree, because the bark will change through the course of its lifetime. So a couple facts about sugar maples. As you know, they make sugar. It's the official state tree of Wisconsin, very popular. It's a really hard tree, good for flooring and furniture. And it's a really hardy tree. They're doing well in Wisconsin forests, and they do well in shady understories. So as a kind of a secondary growth tree in that second line of succession, they often compete really well with other native species. Okay, so next poll here, we've got, again, we've got a broad leaf, so we're on our deciduous tree key, and as you can see here, we've got opposite branching, again, so we're looking right at where the leaf connects to the stem, and that's opposite. So that is going to take us to question number 2, and it's whether it's a compound leaf or a simple leaf, and this is where it helps to have the leaf in hand so you can actually see where the leaf scars are. But if we were to hold this in our hand, we would see that the leaf scars are only on this main stem. There's no scars up here. So that indicates to us that these leaves aren't falling off every year, and this whole thing is one piece. So there's 7 leaflets here in one compound leaf. So that is our next question that we answered. So we've got opposite branching compound leaf. So then from that point, we get to the question number 3, which is 3 leaflets or 5 to 11. So we've got 5 to 11, and that puts us into our ash box here. So it's one of the 3 ash species that we've got in the state of Wisconsin. So next thing we're going to look at is the number of leaflets. We've got 7 on this one. And then again, we're looking at this petiole. So even on an individual leaflet, we are calling where this connects to the main leaf a petiole. So in this case, the leaflets do have petioles. So we've got, let's see here. The leaflets have the petiole, and the leaf scar ends at the base of the new bud, and we've got the 7 leaf, so it is a green ash. And I've got a next slide here. Ashes are kind of tricky. When I first started, there's only a couple, but there still can get some people when you're first beginning. So when I first started, I was happy to get it to ash. You know, and if you can call it an ash, you're ahead of most people anyways. But this slide kind of gets at some of the finer points in that ash box. So we've got the 3 different species here. As you can see on the left, we've got 5 leaflets. So that's going to basically send us to letter B. And the other distinguishing characteristics on that is the leaf scar. So as you see on the far left bottom here, we've got this smiley face scar. And that is leading us to the white ash or letter B. And then going to the center here, we've got, oh, I just gave it away. It's a green ash. And basically the way to identify that is we're looking at this leaf bud again, see how it is different, or I'm sorry, the leaf scar is a different shape. It's not a smile shape. It's the leaf still has the petiole here, but the scar of the leaf goes right up to this next bud, whereas on the white ash, we've got a little bit of a space between the two. Now, I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but these are just kind of some of the things that you're going to be looking for when you're out in the field, and these are the key characteristics. So just knowing where to look when it asks you to find a leaf scar, or knowing where to look when you're asked to make some type of a determination about the petiole. So, and then we go to the one on the right, and the point I wanted to make about this is that it, as you can see, the leaflets, as they connect to the main branch here, there's no stem there. There's no extra little piece that's not a leaf. So we would say that this does not have a petiole attached to it. So that would be a black ash. All right, so ash, it's a tree that's definitely having some troubles right now. I think emerald ash borer story is one that is widely known, and I work and live in the southern part of the state, and particularly in the southeast, there are a lot of dead standing ash trees. So one of the characteristics you can find, because these trees are one of the first to lose their leaves in the fall, you can see the circle on the upper right there that shows kind of the crowfoot branching pattern. And ashes have a very distinct branching pattern that can help you to determine what they are, no matter what time of year. Also, they are great. They split really nicely, so you can peel the individual pieces of ash away and weave these really nice baskets. So it's been used in that way for a very long time. Okay, so another poll here. We have got a deciduous tree, as you can see by the broad leaf. And question number one is alternate or opposite branching on that. So it's kind of hard to tell on the upper right. So we're gonna have to look at the twig on the left. And you can see the buds there are sticking off of the stem, and they are clearly alternate. So that is gonna send us to question number 4 on our deciduous tree key. And the next question is whether they are simple or a compound. So you can see on the upper right, and also we use this actually as the example of the simple leaf. So this is simple because it's just one. And then the next thing we're going to look at, let's see. So we go simple leaf. We're going to number 8, and the question is whether the leaves are not lobed or lobed. And this jagged outline here is what we would call lobing. So this is a lobed leaf that would send us to one of the oak species. So there's a lot of different oak species in Wisconsin. Some of the keys that they're gonna send you to are looking at the outline. So here, is it pointed or rounded? It's clearly pointed at the ends here. So all these veins are gonna come out to points in the leaves, as opposed to rounded. So the pointed leaf is going to send us to the bottom of that oak species box, and it's going to then ask us about how deep the sinuses are in the leaf. So the sinuses are the indentations between the lobes, and the question is whether they go more than halfway or less than halfway. So in this case, they're less than halfway. And this slide, I think, also demonstrates the fact that not all leaves for a given species are going to look 100% identical. They're going to vary whether it's an older leaf or a younger leaf. They're going to vary whether it's on the top of the tree or the bottom of the tree. There's a lot of different factors. Whether they're getting a lot of light or no light is kind of the factor there. But as you can see in the top right, the sinuses here do go quite a ways into this leaf, but there are some other characteristics that will help you determine that it's red. So you got to kind of take a general picture of all the leaves that you're seeing, and it's oftentimes better to look at the more mature leaves because they'll give a more representative look that most of the books or keys will be referring to. So a couple facts about red oaks. The leaves will often stay in the winter, so we've only got a couple of deciduous trees that really hold onto their leaves like oaks, and it's like red oaks, and it seems to be particularly common amongst younger trees. It's a great wildlife tree, and we call it an extravaganza because they're a really important food source for all sorts of wildlife. Red oaks have, it takes 2 years for the acorns to mature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they only drop their acorns every other year. But that does mean that the older acorns have a higher tannin content, so they're not quite as palatable. You'll notice particularly if you're a deer hunter, that the white oak acorns, which have a lot less tannin, are the first picked acorns, and then after those are all taken, then generally you'll see the red oaks being taken because they do have a higher tannin content, and that kind of makes them bitter. So here on this slide, I just wanted to give you a little bit better feel for some of the shapes that oak leaves can take. So we've got, these are all species that you could find in the state of Wisconsin. And it's just important to kind of, as we're looking at these, think about the terms that we use to describe these leaves. So with oak leaves, you're really looking at whether you've got points or whether they're rounded. And you're looking at the lobes, whether they're consistent lobes like the top center white oak, or whether they're more irregular like the bur oak on the top left. And then also the how deep the sinuses go into the leaf. So the red oak has very broad leaves, whereas the black oak and pin oak have much more delicate looking leaves. And again, here's just some other features for determining the identity of oaks. As you can tell, I got a bias towards oaks. I'm a big fan, particularly, being down in the southern part of the state. It's a really important ecosystem for wildlife down here, oak savannas. So just another thing to keep in mind, that we've been talking a lot about leaves and things that are kind of specific to identifying trees in the summer, but acorns and twigs and bark are all really important characteristics to look at when you're identifying trees. Okay, so let's launch another poll. And we are back on the deciduous key here. As you can see, we've got these broad leaves. So we're going to start at the top of the deciduous key. And once again, question number 1 is alternate or opposite branching. You can clearly see on the upper left that this is alternate. So from there, we go to question number 4, and that is going to be asking about whether we've got simple or compound leaves. We were looking at just one leaflet here. So, or I'm sorry, just one leaf on this. So it's a simple leaf, and that is going to send us to question number 8. And it's lobed or not lobed. So last time we chose lobed and went to the oaks. This time we're going to choose not lobed because it is not. And that is going to send us on to question number 9 and the next side of our tree key. So as you can tell, depending on how the key is set up, you're going to kind of get either really deep in it, or you can get your questions answered right away, depending on how distinct the tree species is. So question number 9 is asking about the bark and whether that is papery or not. So anybody familiar with Wisconsin trees is going to kind of get the reference there. We're talking about, is this like a birch type tree, or is it not a birch tree? And if you're familiar with birches, you can feel them. They have a papery quality, whereas this tree, it doesn't come through in the pictures, but you feel it, and it's soft and smooth, and it's not papery at all. So from that, we're going to go on to question number 10. And this is another one that's a little bit difficult from the slide here. I would much prefer if we could, do our definitions talk and just go out in the woods together, and we'd be able to get through this content, I think, a little bit more clearly, but we're doing the best we can. So we're looking at the petiole here, and that is, again, the area where the leaf connects to the stem. And the question is whether it's flat or round. So a good way to tell is taking the petiole and rolling it in your finger. And are there edges there? And would you say it's more square, or is it more round or oval? And you're going to have to kind of do that on feel. But here we've got a flat petiole. So that is going to send us on to question number 11. And again, we're getting to a point where we kind of have to use our judgment. So we're looking at the leaf shape here. Is that oval or triangular? Well, it's not perfectly oval and it's not perfectly triangular, but if I would have to guess, I would say it's more oval than triangle. So, but again, if you go the wrong way, you can always get to the end of the key and just work your way back up and figure out where you branched off in the wrong direction. But we're going to go with oval here, and that is going to take us to the aspen box. So we know we've got an aspen species, and the next question is looking at the leaf itself and the edges of the leaf. So is it finely toothed or coarsely toothed? So you can kind of tell here looking at the picture on the upper left that there are teeth there, but they're very fine. So we've got small fine teeth, less than 1/16 of an inch, and that takes us to our species, which is a trembling aspen, or a popple, or they have a lot of different names. So it's good to use whatever name works for the people that you're talking with. You know, we're just trying to communicate what the species is. So if we all are on the same page, then it works for me. So I just wanted to get into a little bit more on the aspen leaves here, because there are some features that I just wanted to distinguish based on the conversation about how none of these leaves are going to be perfectly shaped. So we're just kind of looking at the size of the teeth here and whether they are large teeth or whether they are triangular shaped. So out of these three, the one that the key is referring to as triangular shaped is the center one. The one on the bottom left here has big teeth, and the one on the bottom right has small teeth. So you can just kind of see how those look, and I think that getting the picture of what these terms really refer to and how they're being used in the field can help you make sense of it. So aspen is a really important wildlife species. They reproduce clonally through the roots. So some of the oldest species on Earth are giant aspen clones out in the Northwest. They're like I said, a really great tree for wildlife, and also good for pulp and paper. So it's one of those species that we can do some well-managed harvesting and have some really well-aligned commercial and wildlife values. Okay, so now that ends our walk through the tree identification through the tree keys. So the next part of our talk is just going into some of the invasive plants that you might find in your woodlands. And I think an important thing to start out with here, it can be a contentious issue, so I just want to put the definition out there. There's no everything is kind of operating in gray out there. It's hard to draw the line on what is invasive and what is not, and how long is something got to be in an ecosystem before it can be native plants. So we're just the definition that we're going to be working with here for invasive non-native plants is a non-indigenous species or strain. So it's something that grew in a different ecosystem than the one it's found, that can invade a natural plant community or wild areas and replace vegetation. So invasive is the idea of invasive is really referring to that second part. So it's got to have some type of a negative impact on native species that we want. And a lot of times that's a reduction in diversity in local ecosystems because they're just able to outcompete the native plants. And then the non-native part is just the fact that they they came from an ecosystem, a different ecosystem. So they don't have a history of interactions with the plants, the other plants and insects in the place where they're found. So we'll just cover a couple invasive plants that you'll likely find in the woods. Again, this is slightly biased towards the southern part of the state, but I just wanted to cover a couple of these. One is the buckthorn. It's very common in the southern part of the state because we've got a lot of fragmented woodlands. It's a species, like you can see here, that does really well on edges. It outcompetes a lot of our native understory species, as well as some of the forbs that we would find in our woodlands, because it greens up faster and keeps its leaves on longer than most of our native plants. So it creates these really dense understory thickets where if you're walking through there, all you're going to be primarily seeing is buckthorn. And because it evolved in a different ecosystem with different animals that are used to interacting with it, there's just not a lot of wildlife value for this species. It provides some cover where animals can hide, but again, it gets so thick in some places that it's just not an ideal species if wildlife is our primary goal. So a couple characteristics, like I mentioned, it's green before and after most of our native plants. So it can start photosynthesizing earlier and shade out some of those other species that we're looking to promote. It's got these bright fruits in August and these kind of darker berries that can linger into the woods, or linger into the winter. They are really prolific seed producers. So if you've got a big seed producing tree, it's going to be hard to control buckthorn in your area unless you're taking out those big seed sources. So there's a couple different characteristics. One that I look for in common buckthorn is a actual thorn at the end of the branches. So if you're there, it's somewhat misleading name because it's called buckthorn, but the thorns are kind of hard to find unless you're walking through a thicket of it. But that's just one of the key characteristics that separates it from some of our native cherries that can look somewhat similar. Another species to consider looking out for is the Eurasian honeysuckle or Asiatic honeysuckle. There are a bunch of different varieties that we could find in our woodland. They don't form the really dense stands that you'll see with buckthorn, but they are, again, they produce a lot of berries and they spread their seeds, and they're outcompeting some of our native shrubs that are more beneficial for wildlife. So here is a waxwing enjoying some honeysuckle berries, but yeah, so they're really enjoyed by wildlife, and you'll oftentimes notice the honeysuckles in fence lines and areas where a lot of these birds will be sitting and digesting their recent meals. So an important point about honeysuckle is that we do have a native variety here, or a native species in the state, and it's called fly honeysuckle. It's got a much different growth pattern than the Eurasian bush honeysuckle that we'll find. So it's much more like a viney species. And then again, if you cut a branch and you look into the pith, it's going to be quite different looking. So it's got a white pith as opposed to a brown or hollow pith on the bush honeysuckle. Okay, two more invasives here. The garlic mustard is a very common invasive species on woodland floors, so it does really well in disturbed areas, and it's a prolific seed producer. So like the photo on the top right here, you'll see woodlands that can get absolutely overrun with buckthorn, and it's just outcompeting some of the other native forbs that you may prefer in your woodland. So they've got a little bit different characteristic, whether they're the first year or the second year plant. The bottom picture is the kind of heart-shaped basal leaf that's going to come out the first year, and then the next year you're going to see these shooting stalks with the more heart-shaped leaves and flowers. It's got this garlic odor when crushed, and it's a species that you can do pretty well managing by hand pulling, but you really got to focus on taking out whole areas, because an individual plant can produce like 500 different seeds, and they've got hard seeds that can last quite a long time. So I'd encourage you all. It's blooming right now in my area. You can go out and pick it, and people make pesto and other kinds of stuff with it. Okay, so the last invasive species I wanted to touch on is one that I've been seeing not blooming in my area, but definitely coming up in a lot of the ditch areas. It's wild parsnip. It's not necessarily in dense woodlands, but it's very common in trails, or like I mentioned, ditches, or other disturbed areas like that. And so the key with this one is it's got this umbel, or like an umbrella shaped yellow flower, and it's got these leaves that have what we call a compound leaf with many leaflets. They can be quite big plants, up to 8 feet tall, and they're biennials as well. So they will just shoot up leaves in the first year, and then the leaf stalks in the second year. And I bring this one up in particular because it is in those disturbed areas that often get maintenance, and this is one that has the phytochemical that if you get the sap on you, so if you're weed whacking a bunch of it wearing shorts and you get a bunch of sap on your skin and that is exposed to sunlight, it will cause a rash like this, and it can be very painful and last a very long time, and I know from experience. So I just wanted to bring this one up. It's not real common in woodlands, but it's in areas that we will be managing around the woodlands. So I did a lot of talking there. I hope there was some value. Again, all this stuff for myself as well, I've gotta come back to it and revisit these definitions. But I would encourage everybody to get out and try to use the key. The way that this stuff becomes second nature is by practicing and just working through the key, and you can do that by just taking a walk in your woods. It's a great time right now. Leaves are out, and you can use this tree to identify, at least get down to some major groups of trees. And then also, I'd encourage you to look for some of those invasive species that I mentioned, because they're going to have impacts on the long-term sustainability of your woodland for wildlife, as well as property value. So just something that's really important to look out for.
Great, Tony. If you have some questions, feel free to enter them in the chat right now. I see Tony putting up some more resources. You want to talk about those? Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just a list of some of the ways that we are available to help. So if you've got specific questions and you want an email response, I encourage you to send it right to learnaboutyourland@gmail.com. That should be the email address that you got your invitation from. So feel free to save that and use that to contact us. And then we've got our website there, woodlandinfo.org, and that's where we post most of our material. We've got a blog on there. We've got this key that we went through today, and a lot of other resources, you know, covering all kinds of different issues, not just identification or scientific stuff. We've got uh, different tax law programs, stuff like that. So we've also got a Facebook page with the Learn About Your Land title. Like we mentioned a couple times, we've got the YouTube channel, and I'd really encourage folks to like our Facebook if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing. Follow us on YouTube, and you'll get a notification when when we put new videos on. And then we also have a new Twitter and Instagram account at Whisk Extension Forestry. So there are a number of different ways to connect with us, and it's just been a pleasure. So feel free to reach out and get in touch. We're here to help.
So I put, if people are looking for a more in-depth discussion of invasive plants, we made a video and recorded it and posted it to our YouTube channel a few weeks ago, just about invasive plants. And I put a link to that YouTube video in the chat. So if you'd like to get some more information about invasive plants, feel free to visit that. I got a couple of questions for you. How about this one? We have a problem with prickly ash in our woods edges. What is the best way to manage it?
Yeah, prickly ash is definitely a challenging plant to manage, and it kind of comes down to your individual preferences. So prickly ash is one that if you cut the stem, it will resprout. So it's best to, if you're going to cut prickly ash, to treat it with a herbicide right on the cut stem. Otherwise, removing it totally from the ground and pulling it roots and all is another way to control it, but then you're disturbing the soil in a way that can encourage some of our other invasive plants like garlic mustard. So it kind of comes down to what capabilities you have, what tools you've got, what your comfort level is. But yeah, I know we've got some resources on our webpage about control of particular invasive species. But yeah, I would encourage you to reach out to the DNR as well, and they can help on some of these issues.
And that's a good point. If you've got plants you're not sure of, they're invasives or not, I encourage you to reach out to your local DNR forester, and you can find their contact information. I put a link to the Find a Forester in the chat, where you can find out which forester works in the county land is located in. And their email is there, so send them an email with a picture you might take of the plant and ask them if it's what it is if you're not sure. It's a good place to start with identifying and then how to control some of these invasives. I got some more questions for you. This one's a tough one. Are there any biological controls being studied for buckthorn? It's okay to say you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there have been a number of different efforts on biological controls for invasive species. One resource that I would refer people to, I don't believe they cover buckthorn, but the U.S. Forest Service Northern Research Station just put out a podcast series called Forest Cast, and they cover particularly they go into a lot of different invasive species, and they cover some of the successful biological controls that have been implemented so far. So I don't know off the top of my head, but I would hope somebody's working on it, because it is certainly a problem in our part of the country.
And I haven't heard about biological control either. So it's a good question, again, for your local forester might be able to help with something like that.
Yeah, just one note I would add too. So a biological control is bringing in another organism to control that species. So a lot of times what they're looking at is insects or other, like maybe a fungus that's from where the plant originated. So in the case of buckthorn, that's going to be Eurasia or somewhere in Europe, and they're going to be bringing over species that has a history with that plant to hopefully control it in our ecosystem. And the idea is you don't want that thing that you bring over to become the new invasive species that's harming your tree. So it's a tricky balance.
I got another question for you. It's about Japanese barberry. Is it the best to use an herbicide, or this person said a poison, but an herbicide to kill a small Japanese barberry plant, or can you just pull it?
Yeah, if it's small enough, you can definitely pull it. It all depends on the timing of your application as well. So for a lot of herbicides, you're going to be spraying them, actually applying them onto the leaves. Of course, you got to follow the label recommendation because the label is the law on herbicides. But an issue with doing a lot of what we would call foliar application is that you can get residue on plants that you don't want to target. So it depends on the size of the plant. If it's small enough and you can pull it out and it's surrounded by other plants that you don't want to impact, maybe pulling is the way to go. But if it's in a thicket of barberry and it's too big to pull, then herbicide might be the way to go.
And there's some really great questions and comments in the chat. Tony and I aren't experts by any means in invasive species identification and control. And so we've been posting, my colleagues and I, Chris Tiles and others have been posting some information about some of these invasive plants and links to get some more information on your own. Again, don't be afraid to call or contact your local DNR forester. I say it 3 times now. Hopefully it's sunk in. Mm-hmm. Okay, I got a broader question about what's killing our oak trees. And we kind of talked about that last night about oak wilt. And it's probably, which is an invasive, non-native fungus that's kind of moving through the state. So you want to talk a little bit about that, Tony?
Yeah, it's it's always tough without seeing the specific tree that's being referenced to kind of get an idea of what's causing the problem. One thing about oak wilt is that it's primarily affecting black oaks and red oaks. So if you've got an oak that's got rounded lobes, it's probably something else. And again, like Bill mentioned, we're not experts on tree diseases. The DNR has a really great disease diagnostic lab. Maybe we can get the link up to that in the chat as well. But they will accept samples that they can make a definitive decision, or they'll tell you exactly what your problem is based on a leaf sample that they get. But it could be a number of things. It could be weather related, it could be age related. There's a lot of issues that oak trees can have, and particular, they're long-lived species as well. So parts of them can die and parts can, continue to grow. So it's hard to know whether it's going to be a terminal, issue or not. And that is really, I think, best left up to some of the, folks who have better diagnostic capabilities.
And just you said that Dylan Bell, who's the DNR forester in Columbia and Dodge counties, just posted a great link for information about oak wilt. I check it out in the chat. Feel free to check it out if you want to learn more. And there's a question about a tall tree or bush that they're not sure if it's buckthorn or an annieberry. They can be really hard to tell. If they give a description, it's an umbrella flower and smelly when cut. I'll put you in the spot, Tony. Any ideas?
Okay. It doesn't sound like a buckthorn to me if it's got an umbrella-shaped flower. A picture would really help, but I think the key is to look at that. Look at the individual that you're looking at and kind of think in terms of the definitions that we covered. Are the branches, or are the leaves opposite or alternate? And that's going to be some of the terms that they're going to refer to when you look up. You can look online. There's a lot of different databases, whether it's the USDA's, the Forest Service has a database that covers all the plants in the United States, and that's going to use a lot of the terms that we covered tonight in our definition. So if you can just kind of think in terms of the key that we gave you and some of the terms that we covered, you're going to have the information you need when you go online and start Googling these names.
I got a question about green ash trees, and it's concerning the emerald ash borer, which is a non-native insect that's killing a lot of our ash trees. And the question is kind of philosophical. Is the clock ticking on their existence?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. It's hard to know. We have seen a number of different tree diseases sweep through the United States, and it's kind of resulted in different cases. One really important one for eastern deciduous forests is the walnut blight. No, the chestnut blight, sorry, is chestnut blight. And that has kind of left to, that species being, almost non-existent component of our eastern forests now. Whereas you look at a case like elm disease and Dutch elm, elms are still around, but you're just not finding old elms. So, what the future of ash trees is really hard to say. I think that there's definitely some hope for a biological control on this front, and I encourage folks to look into that a little bit, because there are options. And then there's also a lot of treatments that are going on specific trees if they've got shade value in your yard or they're on street trees. So there's ways to keep individuals alive, and then I think there's some long-term hope being in our forest as well.
And Dylan was kind enough, Dylan Bell was also kind enough to post a link in the chat about emerald ash borer. His comment is, plan on changing over your forest to a different dominant tree species. And I think that's fair. I think there might be a few resistant ash trees out there, but it's unlikely that the ash component will stay as big as it is now in our forest. So get ready for a change. I think we're good with the questions, and I think we're ready to wrap up. I appreciate everybody hanging out and attending the webinar this evening. Thanks, Tony, for your great presentation and fielding some of these difficult off-topic questions. Good job. We will be getting ready for next week's classes, which are Success with Tree Planting on Monday and Gather Goods from the Woods on Tuesday night of next week. So if you haven't signed up for those, feel you still can check our website for the webinar classes, and you can still sign up. So feel free to do so. Otherwise, thanks everyone for attending, and have a good evening.